Hello, everyone. My name is John Nombrado. I'm here from the kinesiology department here at Cal State San Bernardino. Today, I'm going to be talking about the physiological adaptations to resistance training in prepubertal boys. Muscular strength, growth, and maturation have an incremental increase and a progressive increase between the ages of 2 and 18. We believe that resistance training can optimize that increase to help benefit that child. There have been a lot of arguments that say resistance training isn't good for a child, arguments on when a child should be introduced to resistance training. A lot of arguments say that resistance training can stunt your growth, it can cause bone fractures, it can be too much stress on ligaments and tendons as well as muscles. But we now know that there are enough studies that say that's not true, that resistance training early on in life has a lot of positive benefits. There have been multiple studies of resistance training with children, prepubertal children who are overweight and obese. And we've seen that there's a positive impact with resistance training and weight management. And so resistance training techniques have been involved in many weight management programs. Usually, typically, a child and a youth isn't exposed or introduced into lifting weights or resistance training until the ages of 8th grade and 9th grade, which is the end of middle school, the beginning of high school. And it's up to that individual or that youth to continue their weight training or resistance training experience as they continue in sports such as football, basketball, track and field, wrestling, baseball, all those sports that rely on strength and conditioning to optimize the performance of that athlete. There hasn't been any studies though on the healthy average prepubertal child. There hasn't been any studies to see what changes happen with a child who has less fat mass. What does that look like? What are the changes that happen? And maybe that might give us some insight on how we can prevent a child from becoming obese or overweight in general. Now, I know that's not the only factor that can play a role in keeping a child from becoming obese or overweight. Other factors like nutrition, daily physical activity, mental health, family dynamics all play a role in preventing a child from becoming obese. But with resistance training focus solely targets on the effects and the increase of fat mass. And so a study on the average healthy prepubertal child has been conducted. We also know that there are many benefits of resistance training to adults, such as affecting the bone mineral density to prevent osteoporosis later on in life, which is the bone deteriorating disease usually acquired in the elderly. This study aims to measure the effect of resistance training on body composition, bone mineral density, muscular strength, and as well as cardiorespiratory fitness. The experiment expects that there's going to be significant changes in all these categories with the experiment group. The way that the experiment in the study was set up, the methods, is that there were 18 healthy boys who participated in the experiment, and their ages ranged from 6 to 10 years old. The boys were split into 2 groups of 9. One group was called the resistance training group. The other group was called the control group. Both groups, each boy was instructed to participate or to continue with their daily physical activity, whether that be recess at school or their physical education classes. With the resistance training group, however, they participated in a separate 12-week training program, which consisted of them to participate in it 3 times a week, performing 3 sets of 6 to 15 reps at 60 to 70% of their 1 rep max. And the control group obviously didn't participate in that training. Before the 12-week experiment started, each boy in both groups were measured in their muscular strength, their force per unit of muscle volume, cardiorespiratory fitness, as well as body composition and bone mineral density. For muscular strength, they measured their 1 rep max with using an isokinetic dynamometer to measure their strength in knee extension and elbow flexion. If you're not too familiar with an isokinetic dynamometer, basically it's a stationary machine that safely puts a specific load onto an individual to measure their strength, their muscular strength in a certain motion. The reason why they use this machine was because a lot of these children are inexperienced in the traditional free weight lifting techniques, such as the bench press or the squat. For cardiorespiratory fitness, they used a metabolic cart to measure VO2 max while the child was on a cycle or treadmill ergometer. And then for body mass composition, body mass and body composition, they measured using a DAXA scan, which is an X-ray scan, to measure bone mineral density, lean mass, fat mass, body mass, and as well as I said already, bone mineral density. Force per unit of muscle volume is calculated by 1 rep max plus the peak torque divided by free fat mass. The reason why they also used force per unit of muscle volume was because that is a better measurement of overall muscle function rather than just muscular strength by itself. The results, both groups increased in their 1 rep max and force per unit of muscle volume and elbow flexion and knee extension, but the resistance training group had higher numbers compared to the control group. Both groups increased in lean body mass. Only the control group increased in fat mass, and then bone mineral density, as well as cardiorespiratory fitness, did not change at all between both groups. The most important findings from this experiment was the increase in free fat mass. We know that the resistance training group did not increase or accumulate any fat mass compared to the control group. The boys who performed the resistance training group improved in strength and force per unit of muscle volume much greater than the control group. There was both an increase in lean mass between both groups. Obviously, the resistance training group had higher numbers, but the reason the control group increased in lean mass was due to the muscle maturation, meaning that the muscle also had the opportunity to mature because the boys in the control group continued their daily physical activity with physical education classes or the recess. So that's the reason why there is an increase in general with lean body mass. These results show that resistance training can optimize the strength development in prepubertal boys, as well as prevent an increase in fat mass. This is the first study to show that a 12-week program of resistance training can improve the force per unit of muscle volume. Some changes to consider about this article is that the experiment was conducted 22 years ago. I would suggest that the same experiment be conducted today. Technology and different techniques of acquiring pre and post exercise measurements can have changed, and it is good to compare and see if there is any changes from 22 years ago till now on how the physiological adaptations to resistance training occur. Also using inexpensive equipment to obtain pre and post exercise measurements, such as a BIA scale or a BMI handheld device. In this experiment, they use the DAXA scan, which is an X-ray machine that is very expensive, but it's super accurate. If you aren't able to have the funds to provide that type of equipment, a BIA scale and BMI handheld device can give you those same amount of percentages, body fat percentage and lean mass percentages for a fraction of the cost. Also, I would consider involving girls, prepubertal girls in the study to have more of an inclusive audience and to compare changes between boys and girls. The study only was experimented on boys, but it would be interesting to see the physiological changes in the female body in prepubertal girls. Lastly, another change to consider would be tracking eating habits and nutrition. We know that there's a lot of foods out there that are high in protein that have a high effect on muscular strength and lean mass, as well as there are foods that are high in fat, which can have a major increase on developing fat and fat mass. How do we know that these kids that are in the control group didn't accumulate fat mass due to the type of foods they were eating, and so to keep food a constant, I would suggest to have each boy in both groups be on the same meal plan and eat the same foods each day to keep food at a constant. And that way things can be fair and we don't have to worry about tracking macros and other different nutrients to make sure that these measurements are leveled and even across when measuring resistance training. And that is it. Thank you so much.